let's tell you a little bit about our meetup if you're a first-time attendee. So we created this meetup, gosh, I don't even know, maybe 6-7 years ago. I'm losing track of time. When we founded this meetup, our goal was to explore topics which are at the intersection of Agile and DevOps. And we started with 3 people. Now we are 2,300 people. We try to alternate Agile and DevOps topics, but it hasn't worked out. So if you are passionate about DevOps, if you would like to speak, or if you have people who would like to speak on that topic, I would love any introductions, any help you can give to help us get more DevOps speakers. All right. We have a really awesome event coming up next week. So this is about the role of women Scrum Masters, women Agile coaches, and perhaps a broader topic, which is the role of women leaders in the tech industry. So the tech industry is a very male-dominated industry, and there are very loud, opinionated men like me who often do not allow the wisdom of our women leaders to show up. And that hurts companies, that hurts our customers, it hurts our profitability. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to discuss with 2 of the most inspiring leaders I've had the blessing to come across, which that's Cecile Palmer and Tabitha Baxter. I wanted to learn a little bit what it feels like to walk in their shoes. And for once, I wanted to stop talking and start listening, which is a huge challenge. And then just find out what can I do better to create a workplace that allows the awesomeness of women leaders. So that's coming up next week. If you are a woman leader, or if you know of other well-intentioned people like me, but who are not very skilled in making workplaces inclusive for women, please share this event. And I'd love to see you here next week. All right. So that's a little bit about our meetup and our upcoming event. I want to talk a little bit about the companies that are making this meetup possible. So one is my company, Smooth Apps. We do Agile training, coaching, and consulting. And I just founded another company, Al Dente. And what we do is we help Agile organizations use an ROI-based approach to transformation. So a lot of companies spend a lot of money on Agile transformation, but they don't use evidence-based methods to monitor and optimize and manage the ROI of their transformation investment. So what we have tried to do is take the Scrum.org evidence-based management approach and integrate it with Scrum and Agile transformation. And the way we do it is through a platform called Al Dente. So these are the 2 companies that are sponsoring this meetup. If you're curious to try either our Agile transformation services or Al Dente, just send us a message and we'd be happy to explore this. We also published a bunch of our upcoming Agile training. We've got PSPO, PSM, Scale Professional Scrum, and we are about to publish the rest of our curriculum, which will be PSM 2. And over time, I'm probably going to add PSPO, the level 2, advanced PSPO as well. All right. So that's a little bit about the sponsoring companies. Let's talk a little bit about a cause that is really dear to us, Agile for Patriots. So I'm a grateful immigrant. And a few years ago, I partnered with my friend Greg Gomel to co-found a nonprofit called Agile for Patriots. We give free Agile training, certification, coaching, mentoring to US military veterans and spouses. We are launching our 7th cohort next week. We have made a difference to at least 42 families through the 6 cohorts that we've already graduated. If you're passionate about giving back to our military families, please contact us. We'll find a way for you to contribute. All right. So with that, let's dive into the topic of today's webinar. The intent of this webinar was to answer questions that related to scaling Scrum with Nexus and using the Atlassian suite as an enablement for enablement. All right. So if you haven't read our white paper, some of these things you may not get as much value from our webinar, but that's okay. We'll try the best we can to get you caught up. So we've created a very detailed step-by-step white paper based on multiple real-world implementations of scaling Scrum using Nexus and Atlassian. All right. And the intent of this white paper was to take all our lessons and give you something to start with. And the purpose of today's webinar is to answer clarifying questions based on reading this white paper. Now, who is the demographic? Who is the target demographic? Ideally, you should be using Scrum, single team Scrum. Ideally, you should be familiar with the scrum.org scaling framework called Nexus. And ideally, you should have already used the Atlassian suite in a single team context. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your pre-existing knowledge of single team Scrum and single team Atlassian usage, and you're trying to take it to the next level and apply it to a scaled Scrum context. All right. Now, if it turns out that you don't know about Nexus, maybe you are using SAFe, and you're just curious, can I learn something in this webinar that I can take back and apply to SAFe? You're welcome. I hope you will take some ideas whether you're using Nexus or not. So that's a little bit about the demographic or the primary audience for this webinar. So with that, I want to go into introductions. So I would like to invite Shari, who is the founder of Fringe Technology. Shari, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Just so you know, I'm from Phoenix, Arizona in the United States. And like Ravi said, I'm the founder of Fringe Technology. We are an Atlassian solution partner helping companies and teams all over the world actually with their Atlassian tools. And I've actually been a longtime fan of the tools myself, first starting back in 2004 with Jira, which, believe it or not, is what, 16, 17 years ago now. So it's crazy that the tools have been out that long. And I'm going to introduce next Robert from our team as well, and he can tell you a little bit about himself.
All right. Shari, thank you. Robert?
Hello, I'm Robert Adler. So I am the Senior Tools Consultant and Agile Coach for Fringe Technology. So I've been with the company for several years, and we've been working across, just about any industry, in every industry you can think of. And it's been an absolute wild ride. So yeah, it's just been a great experience. We've done implementations with, single team Scrum, as well as scaled Scrum. And, there have been a lot of successes and also a lot of failures, but I try not to consider them failures, but more of opportunities for growth. I like to consider failure as growth rather than just failures. So yeah, it's been challenging and just an awesome experience. So I'm here to sort of share some of those hopefully positive experience with you and sort of learn from our opportunities for growth.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. By the way, as some of you who had the misfortune to work with me know, I have very high standards, and Fringe Technology is the only partner that I bring into every single client. The Agile Manifesto says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So, a tool is a great slave, but a terrible master. And a tool in the hands of someone who is not aligned with Agile principles and values can cause a lot of damage. And Fringe Technology is the only partner I've found that stays true to principles and values and uses tools as an enabling slave, but does not allow the tool to become a master and hijack and contradict and violate the principles and values behind the Agile movement. So if you need a trusted partner for Agile implementations, I would strongly recommend Fringe. All right. And last but not the least, Patricia Kong. Trish, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Should I share my video?
You can if you want to. There we go.
The whole Zoom didn't break down?
Not yet.
Wow, good thing. Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Kong. I am happy to be here today. It's a it's fun because I can see there's about 40 people on, and when you think about it, when we used to be together in a meetup, like 40 people in a room, that's very impressive to me, and how it feels. But I hope we can have a good conversation today. I have been at Scrum.org for about 10 years. And I'm a product owner of our enterprise agility or enterprise solutions. So I think a lot about beyond the scope of a team working together using Scrum or thinking about Agile. What does that mean for the organization? And when we consider culture and when we consider leadership and things like that. So the Nexus framework is something out of my wheelhouse. We wrote a book. So I did that. And then evidence-based management is something also that I co-developed. So I'm happy to be here, ready to take questions and just share a little bit more that you might not get out of the context, for instance, from the Nexus guide and some of the genesis around Nexus for y'all.
All right. Thank you, Trish. And the most important reason, I think why I'm excited that Trish is here is first, she's the co-creator of the Nexus framework. So she understands the why, the intent behind the framework. And also Trish works with clients across the whole world who are trying to scale Scrum, or maybe they've had some successes or they've had some challenges. And so she has this huge diverse perspective that stretches across multiple cultures, continents, business areas, tech stacks about what seems to be working in our industry when it comes to scaling and what's not working. And so I'm hoping that Trish can share some of her wisdom, especially when it comes to the mistakes and the pitfalls that people often make when trying to scale Scrum, so that we can watch out for those markers and avoid those mistakes. All right. So with that, let's just dive in. I want to take you back to our paper, which is how we got here. I'd love to get some questions. If you could, for those who may have read this paper, or even if you haven't, what is the most important burning question that you have that you would like to get addressed in this webinar? So in the context of scaling Scrum with Nexus and the Atlassian suite. So I'll give you maybe 60 seconds to give your top of mind question, and we'll try our best to weave in your question into the narrative of today's webinar. All right, 60 seconds, type in your most important burning question on the chat window. I will start a timer. Advantages of Nexus over other scaling frameworks. What are the big elements that allow Nexus to fall apart? 30 seconds.
They're good questions, right for the throat, huh? Right, right to the point.
Don't hold back. Tell us how you really feel about Nexus. How do you represent multiple teams working on the same backlog in Jira? And how can you see across Nexus teams in Jira? What are the benefits I can anticipate from Nexus for my organization? How do you, hashtag cutthroat. All right. How do teams interact with each other while they're sprinting in parallel? How to organize Scrum events? How to add Nexus sprint backlog, cross-team dependencies across Scrum teams in Jira? Why most organizations prefer Safe over Nexus? Okay. All right. So some of these questions are out of scope. Maybe we can have a separate meetup that is more dedicated towards what is Nexus and how does it compare contrast across frameworks, and what are the pitfalls. So maybe we'll touch upon whatever questions are relevant to today's session. And then if you guys are interested, we'll have a separate meetup dedicated purely to the topic of scaling Nexus in the context of other scaling frameworks. All right. So with that, what I would like to do is I want to tell you the backstory. So one of the things that I learned from Ken Schwaber, for those of you who've had the privilege and blessing to attend Ken Schwaber's Scrum training, it was really a series of stories and anecdotes. And Ken used to mesmerize us with his stories. And some stories were personal, some were about, some horror stories or successes. And he would spellbind us with his stories. And when you least expect it, bam, there would be a lesson. So it would appear as if, Ken is just shooting the breeze, but every single anecdote, there was an intent that was tied back to the learning outcomes of the class. So I'm nowhere as good as Ken is when it comes to gifted storytelling, but I'm trying to follow in his footsteps. And we are natural born storytellers. So what we have done in this paper is that we have tried to give you a story. And the story is, there is a company, and this company was in the car rental business. And then because of the COVID pandemic, suddenly their car rental business went into a tailspin. So they were trying to figure out, how can we grow? And their investors said, let's go and acquire a couple of companies. One company is, let's say, in the food delivery business. Maybe one company is in the grocery delivery business. And together, ultimately, these three companies are trying to do the same thing. They have a customer who is trying to get something or someone transported from point A to point B. And there are a bunch of people who are willing to do the transportation. So the investors thought, aha, there will be synergies. So they said, okay, all these three companies, you use Scrum, you use Atlassian, get together and make us happy, create a big company. And then what happens is it's a complete disaster. And we use this narrative, this plot line, to try and explain what are some common challenges companies face as they go along the path of scaling. And we try to help you understand how Nexus and Atlassian can help you overcome these challenges. So with that, Trish, if you don't mind, I would love to get your thoughts on maybe what are some of the biggest mistakes companies make as they embark on the scaling journey, and what advice would you give to people? What is the biggest question you would like to get answered in this area?
I think I'll approach that in a way that hopefully can look at some of the questions that the attendees have posted in there. But when we think about scaling, I think one of the things that people almost always, it sits there in the back of their minds, but the conversation is not really had. But it's about what you're scaling for and why. So when we think about scaling, especially when we're talking about agility, you can think about, I want more agile in the organization, or I want to have more teams using agile working together to build something. And the question is, why would you want either? And the answer should be around value, right? But it is very valid to say that we want more in the same amount of time. So when you want more in the same amount of time, you have more teams working together, which is generally very standard, and there's obviously questions about, like, how do we ramp up? Do you do it all at once or not? But there's three questions that I think about when you talk about teams working together. And so let's say two teams, they can work together, that's fine. When you have three teams and more, you start to have that friction and lost knowledge. So this is the whole notion of dependencies. And when we think about dependencies and dependencies as the problem, there are several ways that you can think about solutioning for that, right? So the idea is that the one thing that you want to do is make sure that you're lifting them and making it visible and trying to remove them. The notion of dependencies can reach an extreme, though, because when you start to get into that mindset of we must know everything up front, you're essentially coming back into a very waterfall mindset. And even if you're looking at frameworks like SAFe, when we have this trying to get this deep anticipation, and what we're trying to scale actually is control, we're moving from the other end of empiricism. So there's this balance that we're looking at, and which is why when we look at the number of teams working together, what we find is the boundary of 3 to 9 teams. But there's 3 questions that we're generally asking when you're thinking about scaling, because you're trying to keep that scale as linear as possible, right? So there's something in there about how you talk about scaling and adding teams. But I want to understand when we're looking to add teams together to get something done, when we're building one product or we're working out one initiative, are you considering the overhead of the integration and delivery? And are you balancing your cost and the benefits that you're getting from scaling with the value produced? And is that cost systemically being reduced? Because we're growing, so we're starting to learn more, I would expect those things to be reduced. What this means is that when you approach scaling in any of these initiatives, you should think about it as an experiment and have a goal in mind of what you're trying to achieve. And there might be a goal from the notion of learning, but hopefully it's a business-based goal that you're trying to get something done, giving autonomy to the teams to work together. So when we think about, obviously at Scrum.org, Scrum that's existed for over 2 decades, it's been used. The reason that clients pick up Scrum and people use Scrum with Safe and all Nexus with Safe and all different other types of implementations is that, like Scrum, Nexus is very simple, right? So Scrum is very simple in the complexities and how you have to scale that effectively for your context. So if you're thinking about those 3 questions around overhead, integration, costs, reducing those costs, you have a much greater focus in how you're thinking about something. So for us, what we want to make sure is that when we are using Scrum in that context, in terms of scaling, we're looking at Nexus. How do we, for instance, preserve the bottom intelligence, up intelligence from the teams? How do we preserve self-managing teams? How do we protect them? How do we make sure that we're lifting the transparency? How do we think about how to be rigorous in inspecting and adapting, not only how we're scaling, but what we're scaling for? And those really are all just bound into the Nexus framework, even though it's quite simple. So I gave a very long-winded answer, but the Nexus framework says nothing that shouldn't be there, that doesn't have to be there, does not exist. So even, for instance, when you talk about other frameworks that say, we need to prescribe feature set teams or feature teams, I would say, hey, well, that depends on how you want to approach your work and the opportunity costs of streamlining things into different products, or taking, multiple teams and having them to work together on a single thing. And it's not to say, obviously, that having feature set teams or feature teams are a bad thing, but it innately says that feature must exist because all these people support it. So that's the other thing that we see when people talk about scaling, is that 90% of organizations, when they say scale, they just throw down more bodies. And I use that word specifically. They throw down more teams. And I have an organization I know that said, we're going to ramp up, we're going to add 2,000 people. It was just 2,000 people. That was the goal, knowing that in 2-3 years, they were going to be letting off 1,200 people. So this whole notion of scaling and all those costs that they're willing to put together, they had a plan for that. But it's this notion of, why are we trying to scale in the first place, and the experiments that we're going to run. So that was very long-winded, but just to give you a little bit of the background of what we see.
Got it. So be clear about the why. Why shouldn't just be throwing bodies? Why is usually scaling some business outcomes? And also, do you want to scale control, or do you want to scale bottom-up intelligence? And maybe, Trish, could you just briefly highlight the key elements of the Nexus framework so people can make up their own minds and figure out in their context, which framework is more appropriate in their context?
So the first thing to understand if it's more appropriate for your context is if you're using Scrum. So do you have Scrum experience? And when you look at this picture that Ravi's showing, hopefully that looks very similar to the Scrum.org or to the Scrum framework that you're using. And we have, when we're thinking about that, again, like I referenced before, more than 3 teams is probably where you're landing, and 3 to 9 teams. And we have a limit because of, communication issues. But if you're using Scrum, you'll see that that's where we think about, how do we learn? How do we have progress? Well, that's delivery, right? And who delivers? Well, the teams deliver. That's how we create value. Okay, so there's teams working together. In that circle, we're thinking about integration. Is the work getting done? We're in the boundary of a sprint. Do all those teams have to be on the same sprint? Maybe, maybe not, but they need to be able to come at least once together to have a conversation or review. So if we're working with Scrum, that means that the longest that can be is 4 weeks. So if somebody wants to be on 2 weeks, 4 weeks, that's fine, but we're looking at everything together next to sprint review. On the left, we're working on the product backlog because we're working on one thing. We have cross-team refinement, which is prescribed here because of the whole notion of dependencies. So it's not prescribed in Scrum, but here we really want to understand what are those things that we think are going to come up? What are those knowledge gaps? How can we address them? The events that you see otherwise are, again, all really lifted for us to have conversations. So Nexus sprint planning, if we move on from the product backlog, is about what do we think we can pull in for the sprint? What's the goal? Nexus sprint backlog, how do we visualize dependencies? And these are all outlined in the Nexus guide. But if you see Nexus sprint review, that's one Nexus sprint review because we're looking at one product. And then you have the notion of how do we talk to each other daily? There's the Nexus daily scrum and then the separate daily scrums. Now, the one thing I do want to talk about there and point out is that we prescribe things, again, that we think are really necessary. So for instance, in Nexus daily scrum, we prescribe that before the daily scrums. And it doesn't mean teams aren't talking beforehand, but because we want that conversation to be about integration and what is holding us back as a Nexus, because that's going to plan our day. If you don't have that conversation until the end, after you've planned your day individually as teams, you've lost a moment. You've lost this moment around agility that could exist. And then Nexus sprint retrospective is how we work together as a team, as a Nexus. The Nexus integration team, this little floaty bubble that's coming off. For those of you who don't know, Scrum.org, our colors is green for the product owner accountability, orange for developers, and blue for Scrum Master. And really, if you think about that from a 3D perspective, it's people that are on those teams that are coming together to really think about different things around maybe facilitation, coaching, how can we increase our skills and our capabilities as a Nexus, but also really looking at the Nexus sprint backlog dependencies as that bread and butter and really helping to get that focus there. So what I would expect then, if they're looking at the work that's being done in the dependencies, is that membership might change in the Nexus integration team outside of the product owner. So it's a very fluid role. Some might refer to it as a Scrum Master of the Nexus, but other people might think that that's really, that's not there. And then it's a strange boundary for me, but you can think of it both ways, whichever makes sense for your context and for you. I think that for me, that Nexus integration team, one of the important things is that it's lifting up bottom-up intelligence. So if you imagine we have 100 people, we have 50 people. Product owner, if something's going wrong, it's very hard to understand when you're working with that many people. Is there a team or a subset of people that would understand that, that I can have that conversation with? What that also means is that you're not putting all your Scrum Masters in that team, because again, that's creating an impediment where I need to talk to Scrum Master needs to talk to developers, developer talk to Scrum Master comes back. We want the people who have the knowledge. And so that's what we're doing with the Nexus integration team. And there's a lot more there. But prerequisites, obviously Scrum experience. We want to know the teams that are working. They should have an overview of Nexus. Ravi's done this so many times with other companies. We understand who should be on that Nexus integration team, who's going to be thinking about elevating us and also supporting us as the teams. We have a single product backlog because we're working on one thing, one product. We have a definition of done for all the teams aligned, and the sprint cadence is identified. Those prerequisites exist because we actually see a lot of those things broken in the industry. So like I said, 90% of organizations, they're just throwing people at the problem. But we also see a large amount of stats around teams having their own independent definition of done and not having a definition of done as a whole, which creates a large issue. Everybody's working on a different sprint cadence. A big issue is we always have multiple goals that we're working on. How do we streamline that to one goal? And then I think one of the big problems, we always talk about scaling, but it's a large problem around this notion of product ownership. Who is the product owner? Where are those conversations? Where are the lines drawn for those conversations to be had to make decisions? Because what we found was that many implementations around scaling, I'm not even talking about Nexus, is that they had many product owners for one product. So 85% of products did not have a sole product owner. You saw as product owner, product manager, business analyst, another product owner, technical product owner. We've seen many of those types of things. So those are things we want to draw focus to.
All right, thank you, Trish. So Trish gave us a little bit about the why of scaling and also a quick overview of the what of scaling with Nexus. And now I want to transfer control to Shari and Robert. So I am going to stop sharing. And Robert, if you could start sharing, and maybe Shari, you could walk us through what are the single most important question you would like to address when it comes to using Confluence as an enabler to scaling Scrum with Nexus. All right.
All right, Robert, are you sharing or am I sharing?
You can share and then transfer to me afterwards to your Confluence section.
Okay, cool. All right, hi everybody. We're so excited to bring you this new site, kind of what I'm calling a virtual white paper. And, you know, there's so much focus lately on having online meetings and doing lots of teamwork and chats like Microsoft Teams and Slack. And while those tools are really helpful, and I even use some of them, one of my biggest frustrations is finding something afterward, right? Or keeping a conversation going. And that's one of the many reasons why I really love Confluence. It's actually my favorite Atlassian application. And I think it's the best teamwork space where both knowledge and collaboration can come together. So if you're already using Confluence at your company, you know that the site homepage is usually where most companies share announcements and strengthen their company culture. But what we want to do for Nexus is take that down to the space level. And I'm just going to highlight some of my tips for that are shown here in the site. And once you click the Get Started button here on the site, the pages will guide you through a processing. You can just use the navigation buttons to get through. I'm going to just jump down here to the Confluence section so I can point out a couple of things for you. So leading into what Robert's going to show you about Jira software and advanced roadmaps for Jira, with Nexus, what we want to do is create one space in Confluence for each Nexus. So you're going to have one space for each Nexus and one Jira project for that Nexus. All right. So I'm going to pop through a couple things that here are some of my favorite tips to share with you about that. The first one is permissions and openness. You know, and until the last few years, a lot of teams have been locking down a lot of their content and their knowledge and keeping it private within the teams and certain departments within an organization. And that's not the case anymore. We try to make sure that we're showing people the benefit of leaving things open. So we really advise that you leave your Confluence spaces open. So not only can your Nexus teams get to that content, but so can other teams, and you can learn from each other and support each other in that way. Another thing is to use your Confluence homepage for your Nexus, again, to communicate the things that are important and relevant to the team. And you can do that in many ways. You know, Confluence is filled with macros that you can use. Blogging in your Nexus space is one of the coolest things that can help your team. Just because you can bring those blogs right here to the front of your space and bring them forward. So when people are just going there to find out what's new with their Nexus that day, they can see all the relevant content relating to their Nexus that's important for them. And down the road too, once you start getting data into Jira, you can even be populating some of that data over into Confluence as well. One of the other things that we find really helpful for the teams, and one of the first things they ask for, is something that we kind of call a team roster, right? It's who's on my teams in my Nexus and what kind of roles do they have. And anymore, we're also getting asked a lot to put profile pictures there because everybody is a lot of times working remotely and not necessarily in their office anymore. So this is, again, something else that can be really helpful for the team. Also over on the sidebar in Nexus, let me just show you that over here really quick. Over here on the sidebar, right? You can actually add space shortcuts over there. And again, that's really helpful for your Nexus, right? So if there's important pages that you have, that you can highlight them over there. And one of mine in particular that's really cool is to build a page or a set of pages in your Nexus space for your teams that are for new members of the Nexus, right? So if you've got someone new coming in and you need to be able to share information with them, make Confluence be the center of that. So you can start a team onboarding page in there that has all the information a new team member needs to know. And one of my favorite things to do is to have the newest team member be the one that updates that page for you. So if they're finding that there's things that they needed to know that aren't in there, they can just add them. And then that way it's even more ready for the next person. It's all about making it work for you, right? And Confluence is that flexible. So having something even here like the sprint calendars that are visible, the definition of done for each of the teams, your team agreement, your business outcome and goal, reminders just for the team here in a common place in the space where they're just there and they're present. And again, they're easily updatable as well once the team works together on making any adjustments. All right, so again, you need to remember that it's one Nexus into one Confluence space. And I'm going to pass over to Robert. He's going to talk to you about Jira side. And we're talking about one project as well over there. Robert, I'm done here.
Okay, I'll share my screen. So Shari was saying that her favorite is Confluence and mine is Jira. And, I think, and probably a lot of us on the call, there are so many companies out there, right, that are using Jira as their, primary place of doing all of their work. And I think it's really important to sort of, and usually a lot of times, we'll get called into, to come and consult with the company that's been using Jira for maybe, 10, 15, some cases plus, have been using Jira for many, many years, right? And a lot of times what happens is things just sort of get, cobbled together and organized sort of organically, or as teams need. Like, hey, we need a place, or hey, we have this new project. And so a lot of times when we come into an organization, there's just projects all over the place. People are going into multiple projects. And usually one of the first things that we always do is we say, hey, let's just take a step back. And, sort of thinking about, what Patricia was saying, right, about having, thinking about the whys, right? We want to make sure that we're also sort of aligning the tools with how we're sort of approaching value-centered organizations, right? And thinking about it more from the product side. And that's one of the first things that we start talking about here in this documentation is thinking about sort of how we're structuring our Jira projects, right? And Jira projects is basically just the highest hierarchy of stuff that we have in Jira, right? It's just a collection of stuff that needs to get done. So usually one of the first things we do is we take a step back and say, hey, how can we better structure Jira to sort of help advance and elevate the teams, right, and give visibility, having a single backlog. And the first step in usually doing that is creating, and so if you're standing up a new team, obviously you're going to want to create a single project, and that project is going to be based off of the product. And that's incredibly important, right, especially for some of the feature sets that are just inherent out of Jira, like, capturing versions and releases, release management. And what a lot of people don't realize is that you can actually break up work within a single Jira project. So you don't necessarily have to have multiple Jira projects, although you absolutely can, and the tools do support that. So that's one of the first sort of foundational things that we usually take a look at and examine and say, hey, do we have our Jira projects aligned with how we want to sort of, do this Nexus implementation. And that usually starts with around centering our Jira projects around a single product. So in the same way that, Shari was just explaining about spaces, we want to also sort of equate the same space to that single product. So you could have multiple teams, right, that are all sort of working, but it just makes things a lot easier and a lot simpler, right, from sort of like, hey, where do I go to find the stuff that I need to work on? And just having a single project just makes that a lot more simple, right? We try to simplify wherever possible, and having just a bunch of Jira projects, while possible, is just, it adds, I think, a lot of extra complexities that just aren't really necessary. And I was, sort of talking about sort of my experiences with a lot of other organizations, and this is just from us, sort of jumping in right with a new organization or a team and just sort of discovering. And that's sort of the process that we found that's kind of been the most simple. And of course, like I said, we've had a lot of failures, but I see those as sort of opportunities for growth, including ourselves, right, and figuring out, hey, we've tried these things in the past, what are some of the things that are going to help us to, have more successful implementations in the future. And I think that's one of those things that we've sort of learned over time, right? Just having a single Jira project and a single Confluence base just simplifies everything. It makes it really easy for people to understand where to go. And it also needs to align with sort of having that mindset of having a single product backlog. Just having multiple backlogs, it never works out, right? So that's basically this first section over here at the top, talking about this is where we're starting out, right? So we're sort of examining the why and, aligning with values with how we're going to set up our organization. And let's say we're a company and we're like, okay, we're going to focus on this one product, and we might have multiple teams. We're not really sure yet. So let's go ahead and create a Jira project. So this is where you're going to select, create a new project. Pretty self-explanatory. This is all pretty basic. And then choosing the template that you want to use. In this case, obviously, it's going to be Scrum. And then this is all super basic, right? So so once you create that initial project, it's automatically going to create a Scrum board for you, right? And so the first thing that most people do is either you're going to start populating it, right, with just backlog items, and it could be across multiple teams, but again, single product backlog. So we're just going to start adding items in here. If you're migrating from multiple projects, then you might want to move some of those items over from your other projects. And we're trying to consolidate this, right, into a single view. That's the goal here. So creating new things, creating new issues using the create button at the top, or you can use the little create issue at the at the bottom of the backlog just to throw stuff in there. And that's usually where we're starting off, right? Just starting to build our product backlog. There's also the tabs over on the left-hand side, right, for organizing things by the releases or the versions, as well as epics, and you can, that's a pretty basic features out of Jira. So once you have all that stuff and you're starting to build those items, the next thing you're going to want to do is actually go to the team section. So again, all these things that we've listed out here in this site, and they're not sort of prescriptive, right? We're not saying that this is the only way that you can configure your Jira to work with Nexus. That's not what we're saying at all. What we're doing is we're trying to basically take our past experiences and sort of we've basically have been doing iterations ourselves, right, and figuring out things that do work with certain organizations and things that don't. So this isn't by any means like a one size fits all. You guys are going to have to figure out what makes the most sense in your context. But just taking it from like the most simplified approach, I think has helped us sort of figure out, okay, well, what's sort of the starting place, right, that we can at least, play around with, getting a project set up, doing the configurations, and then seeing how it works. So everything about, using the tools needs to follow sort of how we're sort of, following processes within the organization. And as those things are changing, we also need to pivot and adjust on the tool side. So I'm going to go through all these steps, but by no means take it as like, this is the only way that we can do our configuration. That is absolutely not the case.
Say, Robert,
yeah.
There seems to be a lot of questions relating to cross-team, cross-project work, right? I'm wondering if maybe we could skip to that part just so we can maybe answer some of those questions for people.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Actually, I'm going to flip over to the advanced roadmap side just to sort of show, and I actually like to do this even when I'm engaging with teams, because sometimes it really helps to see sort of like what's the end product, like what are we trying to get to by doing all these configurations in this organization within Jira. And usually when I show this view, it's like you get the light bulbs go off and like, ah, okay, this is what we're trying to get to. So this is a tool called Advanced Roadmaps, actually now included with Data Center. But anyway, this is the place where we're basically trying to take that single product backlog, and now we can start organizing stuff. And you can see right now I have it basically split into so in this case, for our Nexus, we have 3 different teams. And you can see all the different items that each team is currently has on their backlog. You can consolidate the views just by flipping the settings over here. So if you wanted to just see the true top to bottom backlog, regardless of who's working on what, which team is working on what, you basically just turn the grouping off. And here's our top to bottom. And this is all drag and drop, so you can just pop stuff up and down. It's also going to be synced directly with the actual Scrum boards that you guys are very familiar with using. So anytime you can make changes in either one, right? So you can use the Scrum boards that are in Jira, and as you drag and drop and make changes, all those changes are going to propagate over to advanced roadmaps. But the cool part about this tool is that you can actually play with what if scenarios. So you can make changes here without having to necessarily publish those changes back to Jira. So you can say, hey, if we, like maybe business decided, hey, we're going to build, we want this giant new feature set. What is that? What is that going to look like, and how is that going to change our roadmap? You can actually, drop that in here. Grab a giant epic, throw it in here, have the team size it, and then you click this auto schedule button. And basically, what the tool is going to do is take all the data and information that we've given it. Because we said, hey, here's here's the scope of work that's involved. Here's the prioritization and the ranking of the product backlog, and here's the team's velocities, right? How much work can they actually complete in a given time frame? And you hit this auto schedule button, and the tool sort of magically starts populating date ranges for you and says, hey, based off the information you're giving me, here's when I think you're going to be able to complete these things. So it's just a really nice way to sort of organize all of the things, right? Our consolidated product backlog for all, everything that the team needs to work on around the actual product itself. You can also see releases here at the top, so all your releases will show up. It'll show you like if you're at risk, so maybe you're trying to plan too much for this particular release date. And it'll sort of give you some guidance, and it'll throw over warnings over here. So if you're maybe trying to over allocate certain in certain areas over others, and it just sort of helps you play around with that. You can also change the teams, right? So this sort of facilitates a lot of those the planning meetings, right, where we're saying, okay, well, hey, maybe this team can take this one. Hey, we're going to start working on this one, and sort of being able to go top to bottom and say, hey, and flip things out, right? So maybe the one team is like, hey, actually, like we can work on that one. We're closer to that one particular area, or we have more, maybe domain specific knowledge about that one, and we can take that one. So you can flip it around, and actually you can see how that's going to sort of affect the plan. Now, if I switch back to looking at the teams view, okay, so this is where we're sort of saying, and it'll actually show here the actual capacity. And sort of their allocation. So it sort of just helps sort of the teams sort of figure out, okay, well, hey, maybe, driver team is going to be over allocated for this particular sprint. Hey, back office team, can you, help maybe pick up some of this stuff in? So they can sort of switch stuff back and forth between the teams, all fluidly. And the way we've sort of, structured the actual document, and you can see in the document, that we're actually using this team field as the board's filter. So it's all sort of interrelated and interconnected, right? So as you're changing this team field over here, and as soon as you publish this back to Jira, and once the team sort of says, all the teams are like, okay, yeah, this looks really good, let's go ahead and do this. You publish the changes back, and that's automatically going to update all of the boards, right? So each team is going to be able to see those updates, right, on the boards that they're working on, and it just sort of all happens seamlessly. And in the same way on the Jira side, maybe halfway through, you're working on the sprint, you're like, hey, we need to pass this off to another team. You can do that right just within the board, switch the teams out, and all that stuff is going to sort of happen seamlessly across all the different products.
This is awesome, Robert. And one of the reasons, that of course, on our team that we love the Atlassian tools is they support the way your teams work, right? It doesn't dictate it. Sure, there's different things about the tools themselves, that you have to configure and use, settings and things like that, right? But we really want the tools to support your team. And I think that's one of the things that Robert's showing here. It's so flexible that it adapts itself to that really easy.
Yeah,
I know go ahead.
No, I know we're running short on time, so do you want to pick it up from here?
Yeah, if you could just go back to the homepage for the site really quick there.
I lost you again.
And click Get Started, and then we'll just show everybody a couple things. We need the nav bar on the left side. Yeah, so there's so many questions that we're not able to get to here and everything. So one of the things that you can do here is go to the site to the What's Next section. And you'll see that there's linked areas that you can reach out to each of the teams here, depending on if you have questions for us. And another thing that you can do is you can keep your eye on our blog here that's up in the top left of the navigation bar. And we're going to start announcing major new releases to the site here. So it's not just static content, right? It's going to be living and growing as we find new things to help share with you, to help you on your journey. So the blog will be populated, and we're also looking into putting a way to have your questions out here that we can answer. So it'll become a knowledge base, hopefully with the questions for Confluence application. So I'm going to open up to the rest of the panel here. Do you all have any closing suggestions or comments for our?
Yeah, Shari, let me share some closing thoughts as we are approaching the end of our time together. So first, I want to thank Shari, Robert, Trish, and Janie, and everybody who worked on this behind the scenes. I hope that you found, I hope that this gives our audience something to start from. This is not the only answer. It's not the best answer. But in case someone wanted something to start with and customize to your context, I hope that this digital white paper is a good starting point. Make it your own. If you like self-study, we have put self-help resources. So if there are some terminology that's overwhelming, that's okay. Go and do some self-study. If you want to take it for a test drive on your own, this is freely available to everyone. Have at it. If you want some additional handholding, as Shari was mentioning, get in touch with us. If you have a budget, maybe we can do a little bit of pro bono help as our time allows. But then if you have budget, you want some additional handholding, we'd be happy to explore if we can support you. All right. Closing thoughts. There is a raffle. So if you want the $250, if you want a chance to get that $250 gift card, Amazon gift card, or some free consulting, there is a link on the chat window. Please enter your information within the next 60 minutes. At 1 o'clock US Central Time, we will conduct the raffle. We will pick a winner, and we will use the email address that you've entered to notify you and give you and work out, how to give you the prize that you've won. So with that, thank you so much to everyone for your engaged participation. Connect with us on LinkedIn. If you want to continue this conversation, post your thoughts, post your questions. We'll do the best we can, and stay tuned for the recording to be available on the Smooth Apps YouTube channel. So with that, thank you so much. Keep calm and scrum on.